Good morning. This is Thursday, February 1st, 2018. My name is Ruby Powers, board certified immigration attorney with Powers Law Group. We're starting a little bit late, but this is our weekly Facebook Live Q&A with the week review and news, with immigration news. So I'll be at Leadership Houston tomorrow, so that's why we're doing it a day early. But normally we resume these on Fridays at 11 a.m. Central. Okay, well, it is yet another busy week in immigration. The State of the Union was announced. President Trump had the State of the Union on Tuesday evening, and it was about an hour and a half speech. I'm not sure if you had the chance to watch it, but there was a lot of different excerpts that have been talked about the rest of the week. Immigration was brought up a lot in different aspects, including his announcement to want to discontinue chain migration, and also to find, well, he also said Americans are dreamers too, which caught my attention, and he did share some other stories. I don't want to summarize everything from the State of the Union, but basically immigration is a hot topic, and with the need to be able to pass a funding bill by, I believe it is February 8th, which is only a week away, there needs to be some consensus or agreement to be able to move forward. So immigration was a hot topic. One thing to mention, when President Trump mentioned that immigrants can petition for every family member, it sounded like from the way he said it, that's not true. They really can only petition for their spouse, their minor children, their grown children. A U.S. citizen can for grown, married and unmarried, and a U.S. citizen can petition for their brother and sister. But what wasn't mentioned by saying chain migration is that the wait can be very, very lengthy, like 20 years or so, for a brother-sister petition. Part of his speech pledged to protect the nuclear family by ending chain migration. Well, I just want to clarify that we've never really used the word chain migration before. We call that family reunification immigration, and also the misconception that an immigrant can petition for anybody. That's not true. So there's going to be a lot of talk about the Dreamers and what is that really going to look like for a Dream Act if and when we get one. And he did talk about some emotional stories, including family that were victims of MS-13 violence. So we will see what's going to happen, but it's definitely worth reading the highlights if you weren't able to watch the whole thing. So yesterday, that was a big announcement that I'm interested in, is USCIS to take action to address the asylum backlog. Okay, so this was announced yesterday, January 31st. The bottom line is that there's a backlog of, look at this, 311,000 pending asylum cases as of this year. And the USCIS believes that there's increasingly vulnerable to fraud and abuse. And the backlog has grown by 1,750% over the last 5 years. And I've seen that as I've been practicing for 9+ years, and I've done a lot of asylum, and I've seen the increase, and the wait has grown tremendously the last 4 or so years. And they're saying the rate of new asylum applications has tripled. So what they're going to do is they're going to take a new approach, and they're going to take the last in, first out approach. So what that means is, and this is their priority, they're going to schedule any application that was scheduled for an interview that had to get rescheduled at the applicant's request or the needs of USCIS. They're going to give those people interviews first. Then they're going to go interview all the people who applied for petitions in the last 21 days or less. So today's February 1st, they made this announcement January 31st. So basically, anybody who filed in the last 2 or 3 weeks of January, they're going to schedule them. And then they're going to work backwards. So after they get through that, they're going to go to distant people who filed in December and people in November. So why are they doing that? Well, they basically think that the reason that there's a tripling of the applications, tripling, is because they think that people are applying frivolously just to get work authorization. They think that there's a fraud involved. So again, if you're not familiar with asylum, if once you file after 150 days, you file affirmatively, after 150 days you can apply for work authorization. And then normally the work authorization card will come within about 1 to 3 months after that. Well, if you get your interview in maybe only a month after filing, 3 months after filing, you might have your interview and decision before you're even eligible for work authorization. And if your case gets referred to immigration court, you could have your first hearing in court before you're even eligible to get a work authorization. And this can become an issue for people who were considering that work authorization to be able to help pay for their attorney. And also many nonprofits and groups have been filing really good asylum applications, but basic ones that they knew that they were going to supplement later. And now they might have to have that interview sooner and before they even had anticipated. So this is a big game changer for a lot of people because, you know, if a person filed 2 or 3 weeks ago, I said, well, you're going to wait 3 or 4 years. And now I'm going to be saying you might have an interview in the next couple of months. So we'll find out how this is going to, how soon they're going to enact this, how soon we're going to get interviews. But this is a big change. So look out for that. And I mean, basically, immigration was talked about in the State of the Union, where also the asylum backlog, and then also yesterday, the administration allowed 6,900 Syrians who have TPS an extension of 18 more months. Again, there's several other people waiting for the updates about TPS, including Hondurans. We will find out when it gets closer to those dates, a closer time to renewal. But in many cases, if you have TPS and you haven't already been told whether you're extended or not, you really should be considering what your backup plan is in case it's not extended. Okay, well, every week there's a lot to be said about immigration. I try to work and then I have consults and then I have to pay attention to the news all the time because there's all these different updates. So now we're going to go into our questions, and I just want to mention that we do newsletters in various languages, and we're getting them all ready to go out next week. So if you ever want to be added to our newsletter, you can go to our website at rubypowerslaw.com, and there's a place that you can be added to our newsletter. And also we're taking questions from phone, email, from the Facebook Live. I think you can see our number here. It's 713-589-2085, and you can also email contact@rubypowerslaw.com. So we are going to start talking first. We've had a lot of questions about FOIA, which is also known as the Freedom Information Act request.
Okay, why would I need a FOIA?
Well, that's a really good question. Okay, so let me just tell you one thing. A Freedom Information Act request is basically asking the government for a copy of a file that they have in their, caves, their files. I mean, I've actually visited a FOIA cave one time. It was very fun for an immigration and you need that information because maybe it's something regarding one of the cases you've already filed before, or your parents petitioned for you. You need the information. It's information that could be used to help you strengthen your case for a future immigration benefit, potentially. I mean, I'm speaking about an immigration perspective, but really FOIAs can be used on all different agencies for different purposes. So one of the major misconceptions is that FOIA, there's one FOIA or something. No, there's so many different types of FOIA. There's the Customs and Border Patrol, CBP. There's EOIR, which is Executive Office of Immigration Review, which is Immigration Court. And there's USCIS, which usually has, like, if you file a TPS or a DACA or an I-130. So I think some attorneys or notarios who don't really have a lot of experience might not understand all the different types of FOIAs there are. And when you tell them a story about what happened, you need to know where to search for that information and then to figure out which FOIA to file. So another common question we get is how long do those FOIAs take? So right now we've been noticing that the Customs and Border Patrol, which you do that FOIA when somebody has an interaction at the border, for example, or at a port of entry, like at the airport. Those are taking about 4 to 5 weeks that we've noticed. Now, of course, there can be variations with how old the file is, where it's located, and if you have all the right information, because normally you're running off of just date of birth and full name. There's different versions of people's names can be written, or date of birth and country of origin. The Executive Office of Immigration Review, which means immigration court, really, is taking about 6 to 10 weeks. Now, it could take longer if you have a very old case. And the other thing, and then also with the EOIR ones, those are real interesting because sometimes you might get a CD because they've only started recording the hearings over digitally. Remember, it's like in the last 5 or 6 years. Yeah. And but before they were on tape. And so sometimes you'll get the FOIA in a cassette tape in the mail. And the little kicker about that is that you can't really just go find a cassette player, which we don't have that many regularly. You can't just go to CVS and buy one because it's a special tape that generally you're going to have to go ask to use the recorder at the court to listen to it because it's has something to do with the timings that it was done with. So the USCIS can take about 6 to 7 months. Now that one's like the longest of the ones I'm mentioning. So that's like if you're trying to find out if you're 245I eligible, did your aunt petition for your dad before April 30th, 2001 and were you listed? You know, that one could take quite a long time. And then would you be eligible for 245I? You know, all other factors being included. And so you know what the trick about most of these things are is keep copies. Don't send something to the government and don't scan it or copy it before you send it. If you can, if you know, you had no control over it, but do keep a copy. I generally tell people keep a copy of everything until you become a citizen. Ideally, you know, maybe even after that if you petition for somebody, but just keep a copy.
And is that FOIA truly necessary? Do you recommend that I start my process with one?
And again, I want to mention there's other different types of FOIAs. Those are just the ones we see the most. Yeah, if we don't really know what happened, I feel like I say all the time in these consults, we can't talk about the future until we know what happened to you in the past. That's a common theme, like all the time. So I don't like creating a strategy without knowing what happened. And unfortunately, it's not like we have access to some beautiful little database where you can go do and find out what happened. Like we have to wait months or weeks. And so when people are coming right now, for example, with El Salvador and TPS and have only 18 months, you know, if you just do a USCIS FOIA, you've wasted 6 months right there potentially. So we generally say we need one, depending on the story that we're told, of how to find out more information. But there are some times that we could do part of the strategy before we get the answer.
And is a FOIA something I can do by myself?
Well, everybody could do a FOIA. But the question is how well will they do it? Because if you don't know how to ask for the information correctly, you could be dismissed. You could say, nope, we didn't find anything because maybe you didn't check the right box or say the right things. And then you might have just wasted 6 months. Or in some cases, the CBP will send you back saying, we didn't find anything. But generally what we know to do is we appeal it and then they'll find something. So just because they say that nothing exists doesn't mean the person didn't get a voluntary return at the border. You can't just trust that. So you have to go the extra mile. So when in doubt, and actually most of the time, hire an experienced immigration to do it because it's dangerous to do it on your own. And you don't have a lot, if you don't have a lot of time to waste, you don't want to do it on your own and you know, waste that opportunity.
And is there a way I can speed this up?
Speed it up?
The FOIA process?
There is a possibility to expedite, but it's got to be a really good reason. And also you can expedite them when a person is in immigration court detained. That's another good reason. So there's a few options for expediting, but if it's just a non-detained, no life or death situation, it's not really, you're not going to expedite it. So that's all about FOIAs, and although that might not sound so exciting, the information you get can really, it's like being a detective, can really help solve your case. So don't discount the power of the FOIA. So there's another tool that we use a lot of time, and that's another question we have is about
FBI background checks.
FBI background checks. That's right. So how does that work? Well, right now we still have this like white little sheet of paper, and you go somewhere that does fingerprints. Some offices do them. You go to a police office or some like shops do it, and they have it as a service, and you do all your hands and your thumbs and everything, and then you fill that out, and there's a form, an $18 money order, and you send it off, and in about 6 to 8 weeks you would get a result back.
And why is my background checked, and what exactly is being checked?
Well, there's lots of different databases that it checks, but we're trying to see what would show up on your biometrics. Generally, sometimes people have had a criminal past or charge and they don't know what happened with it. So sometimes we've had to do them just to figure out what county did something happen in. And then when we figure that out, or what year, we go to that county courthouse, criminal courthouse, and we figure out what happened, get more detailed records. So also I usually use it for if somebody gets an interaction at the border to find out, because normally a FBI background check was faster than a CBP FOIA back a few years ago. But now it's funny because the CBP FOIA is faster. But normally I would do one just to see if there was a voluntary return, a voluntary departure, or any interaction with immigration. So the other thing to note is that Immigration Nationality Service, INS, Naturalization Service, I believe. I haven't said it out loud. INS was discontinued in 2003 when they created Department of Homeland Security. So sometimes when people had an interaction with immigration court back in like the 80s or 70s, those things can potentially show up on your FBI background check. So sometimes we do it just to see what's attached to your fingerprints, and sometimes when people use a different name or date of birth or a different country of origin when they interact with immigration, for example, at the border. But if they also did fingerprints, then you can find out the aliases for the FBI background check. So it gives you information that you can use to find more information or to make decisions on your strategy.
And how long does the background check last?
Well, we've been seeing results in about 6 to 8 weeks. So if there's nothing on it, then it'd probably be on the faster end. And if there's something on it from some crimes or interactions with immigration, it would take a little bit longer.
And do I have to pay for that each time I file an application with USCIS?
Well, we do a FBI background check at our firm. That's that form and the $18 filing fee to do as part of our strategy. But when you submit applications to immigration, they would generally charge you $85 for biometrics charge, which is a little part of doing that as well. So if nothing much has changed dramatically since you did a last FBI background check, if you had to do one, there really isn't a need to continue to do them on a regular basis.
Okay. And is it okay if I get a second opinion, or will it affect my process?
Okay. Well, that's a good point, because I've had some second opinion visits this last week or two. So if you have to have trust with your attorney. So they talk a lot about you need to be able to trust your accountant, your attorney. I forgot who else you're supposed to trust, but
Doctor.
Your doctor, right? Yeah, you're supposed to trust your doctor. You probably should trust a lot of people, but those are the three that you're supposed to really trust, because you're to do with your health, your money, or your well, in immigration, it's your livelihood in many cases. So that being said, if there's something doesn't smell right, feel right, you don't feel like you're getting inconsistent answers from your attorney, we have a very collegial immigration bar, and we all pretty much know each other 1 or 2 degrees from each other, and we respect each other and we learn from each other. But it doesn't mean that if you want to get a second opinion, they're a bad attorney. It could just mean you don't feel comfortable with them, or maybe they don't have the experience needed for your type of case. Maybe your case changed in some respect. So all that being said, a second opinion will not harm you. Actually, it'll just empower you. Sometimes people come to me and I say, your attorney's doing a great job. And I say, these are some questions you could ask so you can help communicate better with them. But otherwise, I think they're doing a good job. And then sometimes I say, well, these are some things I would do differently, but go ask them and talk to them about that. You can always change attorneys through a process with USCIS. So some people get worried about that. You just change you add a G28 for the new attorney. It can be a little cumbersome in some paperwork, but it's not that big of a deal. You can always change. In an immigration court, you can change as well, but you generally have to do a motion to substitute or withdraw, and but that can be overcome. So I don't think that just because you've signed on with an attorney for a long time, a long process, that you can't change. Make sure you do your research though, and make sure that depending on what's needed for your case, that they have experience in that field.
And what's the difference between an attorney who is board certified and someone who isn't?
Okay. Well, again, immigration is federal, so if you're licensed in California, you can practice in Texas immigration law, basically. And I'm licensed in Texas, and I'm practicing Texas for immigration. So that being said, there's only a few states that have a board certification for immigration: California and Texas and some other states. In Texas, what it means is that you've practiced in that field majority of the time over the course of 5 years, and you've been licensed in Texas, and that you the last 3 years before you you applied and qualified, met the qualifications. You applied to sit for the exam, you were approved to sit for the exam, and you took a day-long test that involved about 3 hours of essays and about 3 hours of multiple choice questions, and that you passed. And you also had to have recommendation from a judge, a USCIS officer, and other peers. So I've lost count, but in Texas it's around like 160 board certified immigration attorneys. And so a person who's licensed in Texas can practice in Texas in immigration, but also there's only 160 or so board certified. There's a higher standard for amount of continued legal education units that they have to keep, and they have to get recertified every 5 years. So this is 2018. I got board certified in 2013, and so now I have to get recertified. So to figure out what I have to do for that, but I will do it.
How can you know if they are a real attorney?
A real attorney. Well, okay. The first place to go is to figure out where they're licensed. Now, I've had to do this for somebody who complained about an attorney in another state, and I had a hard time finding on their website where they were actually licensed, because I was trying to figure out if they were really licensed there. What it should be is that you find on their website where they say they're licensed, and then you can go to that state bar's website, which many state bars are a little different, and figure out if they're licensed in good standing. For example, Texas has the Texas Bar website, and it says find an attorney. They have different ways, but it's like for attorneys to find people and for non-attorneys to find people. And you could go on there and look up me, Ruby Lichty Powers, and you'd find out when I was licensed and when I last updated my profile and where I practice and how big my firm is and what areas I practice and if I've had any complaints. But that works if they're licensed in Texas. If they're licensed in other states, you have to find out which state. Now, this brings me some other questions about notarios, or people who might be filling out forms, or a friend of a friend and they're doing this, or some passport office that fills out forms and does stuff like that. I don't know. That could be unauthorized practice of law if they're not actually licensed and in good standing. So this is a really good, important question. And although it might look official, you really have to do your research. And even if they're a licensed attorney in good standing, you still need to make sure that they know what they're doing with your field. Like, for example, in our office, we know immigration's changing all the time. So everyone sort of has like a focus to all the attorneys to keep up with everything. But we share information, and I mean, it's a part-time job to read the news every day to figure out how that's going to impact my clients and how I can change the strategy and the consultations.
And why is my attorney asking me all these questions about my past? I'm not sure what they will do with this information.
Well, we're not being nosy. I mean, we're doing this because we want to do a better job for your case. Sometimes somebody could say something that might seem like it has no significance. Like, for example, I might have to ask somebody, do you, well, the short answer is we want to do a better job and have a good strategy for you. For example, sometimes I have to ask people, do you have any tattoos? And they might look at me funny, and well, it's because if you want to do the provisional waiver consular processing process, if you have a tattoo that potentially looks gang related, you could get banned from coming back. So that's a question. The other thing is like communicable diseases. Like, I don't really like talking about those types of things, but that could keep a person, might require a person to get another waiver or keep them from passing the medical exam. I also have to ask, is your name on your child's birth certificate? Because if they're not, for example, that could mean that we have to work harder to prove paternity, for example. So it's I guess that I never thought about that question, but I mean, it's because I feel like I'm a detective. We have to ask a lot of questions, and the more information we get, the better strategy we can make for you. And so that's another thing we do here, is that we have people fill out the intake before they see the attorney, and the more information they provide, then the more we can get cut to the chase and make the most out of that 30 minutes or hour we have in the time. When people do a consult in 5 or 10 minutes, I really don't know how they can possibly get all this information in, because often what happens in a consult is that we develop a strategy that'll take maybe 2 or 3 or 5 years to come to fruition. And so every time we're together in a consult, we have to make sure we get all the information, and the attorney is full on paying attention to all the key facts. So that's why we ask lots of questions. And oh yes, so that was one of the last questions that we had, and I am supposed to announce a couple things. So first of all, we have our asylum webinar, which will be a little bit more interesting now that we have this announcement. Is going to be next Wednesday, February 7th at 11 a.m. So it'll be on, we have a webinar program, but you can find out the link on our social media. So February 7th, 11 Central Time. And I'll be talking about asylum, overview, trends, and taking questions from the audience. February 14th, Valentine's Day, I'm going to be talking about waivers, predominantly I-601A waivers in general. We do a lot of waivers just like asylum, and I want to talk about all those details and just give you an overview. The same thing, you can find that information on our social media. Now, we're all watching for February 8th, the government deadline for funding. They got a little bit of an extension. So call your congressman, senator, let them know what's important to you about the DREAM Act or immigration or whatever is important to you. And that also being said, I need to remind you that in Texas, the deadline to register to vote in the March election is February 5th. So let's see, today is the 1st, and that is Monday. So that's not a lot of time. So figure out how to register to vote, find a deputy voter register person to help you out, and make sure that you register to vote. Make sure your address is up to date, because that can cause some confusion if your address is not up to date. And so that's not a lot of time. That's Monday. And then election day is going to be March 6th, Tuesday, March 6th. So there's going to be a lot of primaries going on. There's a lot of activity. So if you're a U.S. citizen who's eligible to vote, 18 and up and eligible to vote, please make sure that you do your duty to register and go vote. Get the little I voted sticker and walk around in pride, and do your research. Make sure you know who you're voting for. And last but not least, we'll do another Q&A on February 9th at 11. We'll go back to our regular scheduled time on Fridays. So thank you so much. It's Ruby Powers with Powers Law Group. Hope you enjoyed our show, and we'll be back before you know it.